Income is often explained through effort, education, intelligence, or discipline. Modern professional culture reinforces the belief that financial outcomes are primarily individual achievements, the result of personal decisions made in isolation. This idea feels empowering because it suggests complete control over success. Yet beneath individual effort exists a quieter force, shaping financial trajectories long before conscious strategy begins: environment. Environment rarely announces itself as influence. It operates subtly, shaping expectations about what is normal, possible, or realistic. The people you interact with, the conversations you hear regularly, the standards surrounding your professional life, and even the ambitions considered reasonable within your social circles all contribute to an invisible framework guiding financial behavior. Most individuals underestimate how deeply this affects human beings calibrate themselves.
Coming on.
Rather than evaluating success objectively, the brain compares constantly. It measures progress relative to surrounding peers. Income expectations, career ambition, risk tolerance, and even definitions of financial stability emerge from observation rather than deliberate calculation. What feels achievable is often determined by what feels familiar. If everyone within an environment treats a certain salary range as success, exceeding it may feel unnecessary or unrealistic. If colleagues prioritize stability over growth, ambition gradually adjusts downward. If conversations center around caution rather than expansion, risk tolerance narrows quietly over time. The adjustment happens unconsciously. Professionals rarely wake up deciding to limit income potential. Instead, they adapt to prevailing norms. Behavior aligns with environmental signals because belonging provides psychological safety. Moving beyond familiar standards introduces subtle discomfort, not because growth is undesirable, but because difference threatens social equilibrium. Income begins reflecting environment more than capability. You may notice how individuals with similar education and intelligence achieve dramatically different financial outcomes depending on professional surroundings. In certain environments, negotiation feels normal. In others, it feels aggressive. In some circles, entrepreneurship appears natural. In others, it appears reckless. The difference lies less in talent than in exposure. Environment shapes perceived risk. When peers pursue advancement actively, growth feels expected. When peers prioritize security, maintaining stability feels intelligent. The mind interprets collective behavior as evidence of correctness. Safety emerges from conformity. This dynamic explains why financial progress sometimes plateaus despite continued effort. Individuals work diligently yet remain within income ranges common to their environment. Opportunity may exist elsewhere, but attention remains anchored to familiar standards. The limitation feels invisible because it appears reasonable. Now something important becomes visible. Environment influences not only opportunity, but identity. Professionals internalize beliefs about who they are allowed to become financially. Ambition adjusts subtly to maintain coherence with surroundings. The question is rarely, what am I capable of earning? It becomes, what do people like me typically earn? This psychological boundary forms quietly but powerfully. Wealth builders often describe moments when exposure to new environments altered financial perception dramatically, not through instruction or motivation, but through normalization. Seeing higher levels of income, ownership, or opportunity recalibrates expectations instantly. Possibility expands through proximity. Understanding environmental influence does not diminish personal responsibility. Effort remains essential. Skill matters deeply. But recognizing the role of environment reveals why effort alone sometimes fails to produce financial transformation. Income grows most naturally in environments where growth is normal. And once this realization takes hold, a deeper question emerges, not only how hard one works, but whether the surrounding environment reinforces expansion or quietly maintains limitation. Now we will explore how environments establish what feels financially normal, and why this sense of normality quietly determines income ceilings for many professionals. Human beings do not evaluate success against abstract standards. The brain seeks reference points drawn from immediate surroundings. Income expectations, lifestyle decisions, and professional ambition are calibrated socially rather than independently. What feels sufficient or ambitious depends largely on what appears typical within one's environment. Normal becomes powerful precisely because it feels invisible. Within any professional circle, a certain income range gradually establishes itself as acceptable. Conversations about salaries, promotions, housing choices, and lifestyle upgrades reinforce this range continuously. Individuals absorb these signals without deliberate analysis. Over time, financial goals align naturally with what peers consider reasonable. The mind prefers belonging over distinction. Exceeding environmental norms introduces subtle psychological friction. Earning significantly more than peers may feel isolating. Pursuing unusually ambitious opportunities can create social distance. As a result, many professionals unconsciously regulate ambition to maintain relational equilibrium. Income stabilizes around collective expectation. You may notice how professionals in different industries, even with comparable intelligence and effort, operate under entirely different financial assumptions. In one environment, aggressive negotiation and rapid advancement feel standard. In another, steady progression without disruption feels admirable. Neither group consciously chooses limitation. They respond to environmental cues about appropriate behavior. When peers accept certain salary levels without question, challenging those levels feels unnecessary. When colleagues rarely discuss ownership or leverage, those paths remain psychologically distant. The environment defines the reference frame. This mechanism explains why financial growth often accelerates after individuals change companies, cities, or professional networks. Exposure to higher standards recalibrates internal expectations. What once seemed exceptional becomes achievable simply because it becomes visible. Perception shifts before income shifts. Now something subtle becomes visible. The concept of enough rarely originates from personal reflection. It emerges from comparison. Professionals surrounded by cautious financial behavior develop cautious definitions of success. Those surrounded by expansive thinking develop broader financial horizons. Normal income is rarely objective. It is socially constructed through repeated exposure. The brain interprets environmental averages as natural boundaries, even when those boundaries have little connection to individual capability. Fear reinforces conformity. Departing from environmental norms introduces uncertainty. Individuals may worry about appearing overly ambitious, financially aggressive, or misaligned with group values. Maintaining social comfort often outweighs pursuing unfamiliar financial territory. Belonging competes with growth. Wealth builders gradually recognize that income expansion frequently requires psychological separation from existing norms. Not rejection of relationships, but awareness that environmental standards may no longer reflect personal potential. They begin questioning what feels normal. Once this questioning begins, financial possibilities expand. Negotiation feels reasonable. Opportunity appears broader. Career decisions become guided by long-term trajectory rather than immediate social comparison. Environment stops defining limitation and starts informing choice. And when professionals consciously examine the income norms surrounding them, they often discover that financial ceilings were never fixed realities, only reflections of environments quietly teaching what success was supposed to look like. Next, we begin to understand how environment influences income, not only through opportunity, but through conversation. Most financial conditioning happens through repeated exposure to everyday dialogue. The subjects people discuss, the concerns they emphasize, and the assumptions embedded within casual conversations gradually shape how individuals think about money, risk, and success. These conversations rarely feel instructional, yet they carry powerful psychological influence. Language reveals environment. In some professional circles, conversations frequently revolve around advancement, ownership, investment, negotiation, and future opportunity. Discussions assume growth as a natural expectation. Individuals exchange ideas about leverage, strategic moves, and long-term positioning. Exposure to such dialogue normalizes expansion. In other environments, conversations center around stability, workload, organizational politics, or avoiding financial mistakes. Attention shifts toward preserving comfort rather than creating advantage. The tone remains cautious even when participants possess strong capability and income potential. Conversation becomes conditioning. The brain absorbs repeated themes automatically. Over time, individuals begin mirroring the financial concerns dominant within their environment. If peers consistently discuss job security, security becomes the central financial objective. If peers discuss scaling opportunities, growth becomes psychologically familiar. Ambition evolves through exposure rather than intention. You may notice how financial vocabulary itself differs across environments. Some groups speak comfortably about equity, ownership, and strategic risk. Others rarely use such language, focusing instead on salary increments or benefits optimization. These differences influence not only knowledge, but perception of possibility. What is discussed becomes thinkable. When certain financial ideas never appear in conversation, they remain psychologically distant. Individuals rarely pursue paths they cannot easily imagine. Environment limits imagination quietly by limiting exposure to alternative frameworks. Silence can be as influential as discussion. The absence of conversations about investing, entrepreneurship, or leverage signals implicitly that such paths are unusual or unnecessary. Professionals remain competent within existing structures while overlooking opportunities outside familiar discourse. Now, something subtle becomes visible. Conversations also transmit emotional attitudes toward money. Cynicism about wealth, skepticism toward success, or discomfort discussing financial ambition can subtly discourage expansion. Individuals adapt their goals to avoid social friction. Belonging shapes financial language. Wealth builders often describe moments when new environments expose them to entirely different conversations. Not motivational speeches, but ordinary dialogue that assumed larger financial possibilities. These interactions recalibrated expectations without direct instruction. Perspective change through proximity. Understanding this dynamic reveals why income growth sometimes follows network shifts rather than skill development alone. When individuals enter environments where wealth-building conversations are common, their thinking expands naturally. Environment influences through repetition. Financial behavior gradually aligns with the ideas most frequently encountered. The mind treats repeated conversation as evidence of normality. Possibility becomes believable through familiarity. And once professionals begin paying attention to the conversations surrounding them, they often realize that income is shaped not only by what they know, but by what their environment consistently talks about, encourages, and quietly expects. Now the perspective shifts toward one of the most powerful environmental forces influencing income: comfort. Comfort rarely feels restrictive. In fact, it often appears as success itself. Stable employment, predictable routines, familiar colleagues, and manageable financial pressure create an environment where life functions smoothly. For many professionals, reaching this stage represents years of effort finally producing security. Yet comfort introduces an unexpected psychological effect. When environments provide sufficient stability, urgency disappears. Growth stops feeling necessary. Ambition softens not because desire vanishes, but because discomfort, the force that often drives change, no longer exists. Income stabilizes where discomfort ends. Human behavior adapts quickly to improved conditions. Once basic financial stress fades, the mind recalibrates expectations. What once felt like progress becomes baseline. The environment begins reinforcing maintenance rather than expansion. Comfort quietly becomes an income ceiling. You may notice how professionals remain in roles that feel acceptable rather than optimal. Compensation meets needs. Work demands remain manageable. Social environments feel predictable. Leaving such conditions requires introducing uncertainty even when long-term opportunity exists elsewhere. The emotional cost of change rises. Environment reinforces this stability through subtle validation. Peers express satisfaction with similar outcomes. Conversations emphasize balance, predictability, and avoiding unnecessary risk. Ambition beyond environmental norms may feel excessive or disruptive. Growth begins to feel optional. Comfort alters risk perception. Opportunities involving relocation, new industries, or higher responsibility appear disproportionately demanding because they threaten emotional equilibrium rather than financial survival. The environment rewards continuity. Over time, individuals become highly skilled at maintaining stability while gradually disengaging from expansion. Income grows slowly because behavior optimizes for comfort rather than trajectory. The limitation feels rational. After all, stability appears intelligent. Avoiding unnecessary stress seems mature. Yet financial independence often requires temporary discomfort. exposure to unfamiliar challenges that expand capability and opportunity. Wealth rarely grows inside permanent comfort zones. Now something subtle becomes visible. Comfort environments reduce exposure to individuals operating at higher levels of ambition. Without comparative reference points, the mind assumes current conditions represent reasonable completion rather than transitional stage. Expectation contracts quietly. Professionals may feel vaguely restless despite financial stability. The sensation is difficult to explain because nothing appears objectively wrong. The environment functions well, yet growth feels suspended. This restlessness signals misalignment between capability and environment. Wealth builders learn to interpret comfort differently. Instead of viewing comfort as an endpoint, they treat it as temporary recovery space before seeking environments that challenge them again. They recognize that sustained growth requires periodic exposure to uncertainty. Comfort becomes strategic rather than permanent. This does not mean rejecting stability entirely. It means remaining aware that environments optimized for ease rarely produce significant income expansion. Growth environments often feel demanding precisely because they stretch identity and expectation. And once professionals recognize how comfort quietly defines income boundaries, they begin evaluating environments not only by how safe they feel, but by whether those environments continue expanding what feels possible. Next, we begin to understand how income expands not only through personal effort but through proximity, specifically proximity to ambition. Human beings adjust their behavior according to the standards surrounding them. Ambition is no exception. The level of aspiration considered normal within an environment gradually becomes internalized. Individuals rarely decide consciously how ambitious they should be. Instead, ambition calibrates itself through observation. Proximity determines expectation. When professionals spend time among individuals actively pursuing advancement, ownership, innovation, or financial leverage, growth becomes psychologically ordinary. Conversations assume progress. Risk-taking appears thoughtful rather than reckless. Expansion feels natural because others treat it as routine. Ambition becomes contagious through normalization. In environments where ambition is muted, however, the opposite occurs. Stability dominates discussion. Incremental improvement replaces transformational thinking. High achievement may be admired abstractly but rarely pursued actively. The difference is subtle but powerful. You may notice how individuals entering new professional environments often experience rapid shifts in perspective. Exposure to peers negotiating assertively, building side ventures, investing strategically, or pursuing leadership roles alters internal standards almost immediately. Nothing external forces change. Perception changes first. The mind begins asking new questions. Why not aim higher? Why not negotiate? Why not pursue ownership rather than participation? These questions emerge naturally once ambition becomes visible. Environment expands imagination before it expands income. Fear diminishes when ambitious behavior appears common. Actions previously perceived as risky begin feeling reasonable because social evidence supports them. The brain interprets repeated examples as proof of feasibility. Confidence grows through exposure rather than instruction. Now something subtle becomes visible. Proximity does not merely influence motivation, it influences identity. Individuals begin redefining themselves in relation to surrounding expectations. The internal narrative shifts from people like me do this to people like us do this. Identity aligns with environment. This explains why income growth frequently accelerates after individuals change networks, industries, or professional communities. The shift is not purely economic. It is psychological recalibration triggered by proximity to different standards of ambition. Wealth builders intentionally seek environments slightly beyond their current level. Not environments so distant that belonging feels impossible, but environments where growth remains visible and expected. Being surrounded by individuals operating at higher levels stretches perception continuously. Comfort decreases temporarily while capability expands. Proximity to ambition introduces constructive pressure. Individuals observe new benchmarks and naturally adjust behavior upward. Negotiation becomes easier. Opportunity recognition improves. Risk tolerance evolves. Income begins following expectation. This process requires no motivational effort. Human psychology adapts automatically to environmental signals. The presence of ambitious peers functions as silent permission to pursue greater outcomes. And once professionals recognize the influence of proximity, they often realize that income growth depends not only on working harder, but on positioning themselves near environments where ambition is already normal, allowing financial expansion to emerge from alignment rather than force. Next, we begin to understand how environments influence income through something rarely examined directly: the financial language people use every day. Language shapes perception. The words individuals hear repeatedly determine how they interpret opportunity, risk, and success. Within professional environments, financial vocabulary communicates assumptions about what money represents and how it should be pursued. Some environments speak the language of earning. Others speak the language of building. In earning-focused environments, conversations revolve around compensation, promotions, annual raises, and benefits. Financial progress is measured through salary adjustments. Stability and predictability become central themes. Income appears tied primarily to employment structures. This language subtly frames financial possibility. When earning dominates discussion, individuals begin interpreting income growth as dependent on institutional progression. Advancement feels linear. Negotiation occurs within defined boundaries. Financial imagination narrows toward improving position inside existing systems rather than expanding beyond them. The environment teaches participation. In contrast, environments oriented toward building use different language. Conversations include ownership, leverage, equity, scalability, and long-term positioning. Income appears connected not only to effort, but to structure, how work is organized, multiplied, or extended beyond personal labor. The difference is linguistic before it becomes financial. You may notice how exposure to different financial language changes perception rapidly. Concepts previously unfamiliar become understandable once terminology becomes common. Opportunities once invisible become recognizable because the mind acquires vocabulary capable of describing them. Language expands awareness. Without appropriate language, certain financial strategies remain psychologically inaccessible. Individuals rarely pursue paths they cannot articulate clearly. Environment determines not only what opportunities exist, but whether those opportunities can be conceptualized at all. Silence around wealth-building concepts creates limitation without intention. Now something subtle becomes visible. Financial language also conveys emotional attitudes toward money. In some environments, discussions of wealth carry discomfort or skepticism. In others, financial growth is treated neutrally, as a natural outcome of strategic thinking. Emotional tone shapes ambition. If conversations frame wealth as risky, excessive, or unrealistic, individuals internalize caution. If wealth is discussed analytically and calmly, expansion feels intellectually legitimate rather than emotionally charged. The environment normalizes belief systems through dialogue. Wealth builders often describe realizing that their financial thinking changed after entering environments where money was discussed differently, not more frequently, but more strategically. The shift occurred through exposure rather than instruction. Perspective evolves through language repetition. As vocabulary expands, so does perception of agency. Individuals begin evaluating income not only as something received, but as something designed. Career decisions become structural rather than reactive. Money transforms from salary to system. And once professionals recognize the financial language surrounding them, they often discover that income growth depends partly on learning new ways to think and speak about money, because environment shapes not only what opportunities exist, but how clearly those opportunities can be seen and pursued. Next, we begin to understand how environments transform expectations into financial reality. Human behavior tends to move toward what feels expected rather than what is theoretically possible. Expectations function as invisible boundaries guiding effort, risk tolerance, and long-term planning. Within professional environments, these expectations form collectively, shaping how individuals interpret their own potential. Income often reflects expectation more than ability. When an environment consistently communicates that a certain income level represents success, individuals unconsciously adjust their goals accordingly. Once that level is reached, motivation softens. Progress feels complete, even when capacity for further growth remains substantial. Expectation becomes completion. You may notice how professionals sometimes experience decreased ambition after achieving milestones widely celebrated within their peer group. The achievement satisfies environmental standards, reducing psychological pressure to continue expanding. The environment signals that enough has been achieved. This process occurs subtly. No explicit limitation is imposed. Instead, repeated reinforcement establishes a shared understanding of reasonable aspiration. Individuals rarely question these boundaries because they appear socially validated. Belonging reinforces expectation. In environments where high achievement is common, expectations rise naturally. Advancement feels continuous because peers treat growth as ongoing rather than exceptional. Income expands not through increased effort alone, but through elevated standards of what is considered normal progress. Expectation stretches behavior. Now something subtle becomes visible. Expectations influence not only ambition, but perception of risk. When higher earnings or entrepreneurial pursuits appear ordinary within an environment, pursuing them feels safe. When such paths appear unusual, they feel dangerous regardless of objective probability. Risk is socially interpreted. Professionals surrounded by cautious expectations often perceive ambitious moves as unnecessarily risky. Those surrounded by expansive expectations perceive similar actions as logical next steps. The difference lies in psychological framing rather than factual risk. Environment shapes confidence before outcomes occur. Over time, individuals begin behaving in ways consistent with environmental expectation. Negotiations become bolder or more restrained. Career decisions become expansive or conservative. Investment behavior becomes proactive or defensive. Income follows behavior shaped by expectation. Wealth builders frequently describe pivotal moments when entering environments with higher standards altered their self-perception. Exposure alone recalibrated what felt achievable. Goals expanded without deliberate effort because expectations shifted automatically. Identity adjusts to match surroundings. This dynamic reveals why talent alone rarely determines income trajectory. Two equally capable professionals may follow entirely different financial paths depending on the expectations embedded within their environments. Expectation becomes self-fulfilling. Once individuals recognize this influence, a powerful question emerges. Are current expectations aligned with personal capability or merely reflections of environmental norms? And when professionals begin consciously evaluating the expectations surrounding them, they often discover that income growth accelerates not simply through working harder, but through inhabiting environments where higher outcomes feel inevitable rather than extraordinary. Now the perspective shifts toward an influence that is difficult to measure but deeply connected to income growth, the energetic pace of an environment. Every professional environment carries an underlying rhythm. Some environments move slowly, emphasizing stability, predictability, and preservation. Others operate with noticeable momentum, where ideas circulate quickly, decisions evolve rapidly, and individuals continuously pursue improvement. This energetic difference shapes financial outcomes more than most people realize. Humans regulate effort subconsciously according to surrounding energy. When the environment operates at a moderate pace, personal urgency adjusts downward. Ambition feels excessive if it exceeds collective intensity. Individuals match the speed of their surroundings without deliberate intention. Energy establishes behavioral baseline. In slower environments, long-term planning often dominates daily activity. Change happens cautiously. Advancement occurs through established timelines. Risk avoidance feels intelligent because collective behavior prioritizes continuity. Income growth mirrors this rhythm. In higher energy environments, however, motion becomes normal. People discuss new opportunities frequently. Learning occurs continuously. Decisions are evaluated quickly and revised when necessary. Progress feels ongoing rather than occasional. Momentum becomes cultural. You may notice how entering such environments creates immediate psychological stimulation. Attention sharpens. Curiosity increases. Individuals begin thinking about possibilities previously ignored. The environment itself generates cognitive activation. Energy expands perception. This effect does not depend solely on industry. Two organizations within the same field can operate at dramatically different energetic levels. One may emphasize maintenance, another emphasizes expansion. Professionals adapt automatically to whichever rhythm surrounds them. Behavior synchronizes with environment. Now something subtle becomes visible. High energy environments reduce fear of experimentation because experimentation becomes common. Trying new strategies no longer signals recklessness. It signals participation in collective progress. Fear weakens when movement feels normal. Conversely, low energy environments unintentionally discourage ambition. Individuals may hesitate to propose ideas, pursue advancement, or explore new opportunities because doing so disrupts established equilibrium. Stability becomes inertia. Wealth builders often seek environments slightly faster than their natural pace. Exposure to greater momentum stretches capability gradually. Skills evolve more rapidly. Opportunities appear more frequently because attention remains oriented toward possibility rather than preservation. Income follows momentum. This does not imply constant intensity or burnout. Sustainable growth requires balance. The critical factor lies in whether an environment encourages forward motion or quiet maintenance. Energy determines trajectory. Professionals operating within expansion-oriented environments often experience accelerated learning and increased income, not solely due to talent, but because surrounding momentum continuously reinforces progress. Environment supplies psychological propulsion, and once individuals recognize the energetic influence of their surroundings, they begin evaluating environments not only by compensation or stability, but by whether those environments generate the momentum necessary for sustained financial growth. Next, we begin to understand how environments influence income through something rarely discussed directly: opportunity density. Opportunity density refers to how frequently meaningful possibilities appear within an environment. Some professional settings expose individuals to new ideas, collaborations, leadership openings, and strategic conversations constantly. Other environments present opportunities only occasionally, often requiring long periods of waiting before advancement becomes available. The difference is not always visible at first. Many professionals evaluate environments primarily through salary, role title, or organizational reputation. Yet, income growth often depends less on current compensation and more on how many future pathways exist within daily surroundings. Environment determines exposure frequency. In high opportunity density environments, individuals encounter new projects, influential relationships, and skill-expanding challenges regularly. Even routine interactions contain potential leverage. Conversations lead to introductions. Responsibilities evolve quickly. Progress emerges through accumulation of small openings. Opportunity becomes normal background noise. In low opportunity density environments, advancement depends heavily on formal structures. Promotion cycles remain fixed. Role definitions stay stable. Change occurs slowly and predictably. Individuals may perform exceptionally, yet encounter limited avenues for accelerated growth simply because opportunities appear infrequently. Effort meets structural limitation. You may notice how professionals sometimes attribute slow income growth to personal shortcomings when the real constraint lies in environment. Capability exists, motivation remains strong, but opportunity exposure remains low. Environment shapes probability. Wealth builders often prioritize proximity to opportunity rather than immediate comfort. They recognize that frequent exposure to new possibilities increases the likelihood of transformational outcomes over time. Even opportunities that do not succeed contribute learning, connections, and visibility. Repeated exposure compounds advantage. Now something subtle becomes visible. Opportunity density also influences mindset. When opportunities appear frequently, rejection loses emotional intensity. Missing one opportunity feels insignificant because others will follow. Fear decreases because scarcity disappears. Abundance becomes experiential rather than theoretical. In environments where opportunities are rare, each decision feels heavy. Risk avoidance increases because consequences appear larger. Individuals protect existing positions carefully, unintentionally slowing financial growth. Scarcity perception shapes behavior. The psychological effect is profound. High opportunity density environments encourage experimentation, adaptability, and forward movement. Low density environments encourage preservation and patience. Income reflects environmental probability structure. Professionals who experience rapid financial advancement often describe moments when entering new environments suddenly multiplied available options. Their ability did not change overnight. the frequency of opportunity changed. Exposure accelerated outcome. Understanding opportunity density reveals why environment matters beyond culture or comfort. It determines how often chance interacts with preparation. Talent thrives when opportunity appears regularly. And once professionals begin evaluating environments based on opportunity exposure rather than immediate stability, they often discover that income growth depends less on waiting for the right moment and more on positioning themselves where meaningful moments occur naturally and often. Now the perspective shifts toward one of the deepest mechanisms through which environment determines income, social proof, and how it silently constructs financial identity. Human beings rarely decide who they are in isolation. Identity forms relationally. The brain continuously scans surrounding people to understand what behaviors are acceptable, realistic, and safe. This process operates beneath conscious awareness, shaping decisions long before deliberate reasoning begins. Financial life is no exception. Income, ambition, risk tolerance, and even definitions of success are heavily influenced by observing what others around us treat as normal. Social proof functions as psychological permission. When individuals repeatedly witness certain financial behaviors within their environment, those behaviors lose emotional resistance. Negotiating compensation feels natural if peers negotiate openly. Changing companies for growth feels reasonable if colleagues do so regularly. Investing, building ownership, or pursuing unconventional opportunities begins to feel intellectually legitimate once visible examples exist nearby. Visibility reduces psychological friction. Without social proof, however, identical actions feel disproportionately risky. The absence of examples creates emotional uncertainty. Even highly analytical professionals hesitate to act when they lack reference points, confirming that people like them successfully pursue similar paths. The brain interprets unfamiliar behavior as potential threat. This dynamic explains why income often clusters within social groups. Professionals surrounded by individuals earning within a certain range unconsciously calibrate expectations accordingly. Financial ambition adjusts to maintain social coherence. Moving too far beyond environmental norms introduces subtle psychological discomfort, not necessarily envy or judgment from others, but internal tension created by departing from familiar identity. Belonging competes with expansion. You may notice how conversations within professional circles reinforce financial identity continuously. Lifestyle choices, housing discussions, travel habits, and career expectations collectively signal what level of success is appropriate. Over time, individuals internalize these signals as personal standards rather than environmental influence. Financial identity becomes socially constructed. This construction is powerful because it feels authentic. Individuals believe their goals originate internally when in reality those goals have been shaped through repeated exposure to collective behavior. The environment defines not only what is possible, but what feels reasonable to pursue. Reasonableness becomes an invisible boundary. Now something subtle becomes visible. Social proof affects confidence more than capability. Two equally skilled professionals may perceive entirely different levels of opportunity depending on environmental exposure. One interprets higher income as achievable progression. The other interprets it as exceptional rarity. Perception alters behavior before opportunity appears. In environments where wealth-building behaviors remain uncommon, individuals often wait for certainty before acting. They seek validation through information rather than observation. Analysis increases while action decreases because no social reference confirms success as typical. Uncertainty persists despite competence. Conversely, environments rich in visible financial success reduce overanalysis. Individuals act sooner because social evidence substitutes for personal proof. Seeing others succeed normalizes experimentation. Failure becomes less threatening because it appears part of collective experience rather than per deviation. Social proof reduces psychological isolation. Wealth builders frequently describe moments when exposure to new networks transformed their financial trajectory without direct instruction. Simply observing peers operating differently reshaped internal standards. Income levels once perceived as distant suddenly appeared realistic because they existed within immediate social context. Identity expanded through observation. This transformation occurs because humans anchor identity to group membership. When surrounded by individuals pursuing ownership, strategic risk, or exponential growth, the internal narrative shifts subtly from that type of person succeeds to people like us succeed this way. Identity precedes income change. As identity evolves, behavior follows naturally. Negotiations become more confident. Opportunities previously dismissed receive consideration. Long-term thinking strengthens because surrounding examples demonstrate delayed rewards materializing consistently. The individual does not force ambition. Ambition becomes normalized. Now the deeper implication emerges. Social proof not only encourages growth, but also stabilizes limitation. Remaining within environments where financial ambition remains modest can quietly reinforce ceilings regardless of personal potential. Individuals maintain alignment with group identity even when capable of greater expansion. The environment protects familiarity. Breaking beyond environmental norms requires psychological independence, the willingness to pursue outcomes not yet validated by immediate surroundings. This step often feels uncomfortable because it temporarily disrupts belonging before new identity stabilizes. Growth involves temporary misalignment. Professionals who intentionally seek new social proof often experience accelerated financial development. Exposure to individuals operating at higher strategic levels recalibrates expectations continuously. Conversations change, assumptions change, risk perception changes, income begins reflecting updated identity. Importantly, this shift does not require abandoning existing relationships. It requires expanding environmental inputs. Introducing new reference groups broadens perception of possibility without rejecting past influence. Environment becomes consciously curated. Over time, individuals recognize that financial identity is not fixed but adaptive. Surroundings continuously reshape what feels achievable. By choosing environments where desired outcomes are already normal, professionals reduce psychological resistance to growth. Wealth emerges where identity aligns with expanded possibility. And once social proof begins reinforcing expansion rather than limitation, income growth often follows with surprising consistency. Not because ability suddenly increases, but because environment finally grants psychological permission to pursue what was always possible. Next, we begin to understand an important paradox. If environment influences income so profoundly, why do capable professionals rarely change environments intentionally? The answer lies not in logic, but in psychology. Human beings are deeply adapted for stability within familiar social structures. Environments provide more than professional opportunity. They provide identity reinforcement, emotional predictability, and relational safety. Colleagues understand shared experiences. Conversations require little explanation. Expectations feel clear. Over time, familiarity becomes psychologically comfortable even when growth slows. Comfort creates attachment. Leaving an environment, therefore, does not feel like a strategic adjustment. It feels like identity disruption. Changing industries, networks, cities, or professional circles introduces uncertainty about belonging. The individual must renegotiate social position, credibility, and self-perception simultaneously. The brain interprets this as risk. Even when a new environment offers greater opportunity, emotional resistance appears. Professionals may intellectually recognize potential advantages, yet hesitate repeatedly. The hesitation rarely concerns capability. It concerns temporary loss of familiarity. Stability competes with expansion. You may notice how individuals remain in environments that no longer challenge them simply because those environments confirm who they already know themselves to be. Recognition feels safe. Reputation feels established. Moving elsewhere resets these advantages. Starting again feels psychologically expensive. Environment change introduces a period where competence becomes invisible temporarily. Established expertise may not transfer immediately. New peers possess different reference points. Social proof disappears until new relationships form. During this transition, confidence may fluctuate despite unchanged ability. The mind prefers known limitation over unknown possibility. Now something subtle becomes visible. Fear of environmental change often disguises itself as rational caution. Professionals tell themselves they are waiting for better timing, additional preparation, or clearer opportunity. Beneath these explanations lies discomfort with temporary identity instability. Growth requires psychological relocation before financial relocation. Wealth builders often accept this transitional discomfort consciously. They recognize that expanding income frequently demands entering spaces where they are no longer the most experienced or comfortable participant. Exposure to higher standards initially produces insecurity rather than confidence. Discomfort signals expansion. This stage can feel unsettling because comparison intensifies. Surrounded by individuals operating at higher levels, one's previous achievements may appear ordinary. Yet this recalibration creates powerful developmental pressure. Skills sharpen rapidly, perspective broadens, financial thinking evolves, environment stretches identity gradually. Another important factor emerges: loyalty. Many professionals feel emotional responsibility toward environments that supported earlier stages of their career. Leaving can feel like abandoning stability or relationships that once provided opportunity. But environments serve phases, not permanence. Remaining beyond the developmental usefulness of an environment often limits growth unintentionally. What once nurtured progress may later restrict it simply because expectations have stabilized. Wealth builders reinterpret loyalty as gratitude rather than permanence. They appreciate past environments while allowing themselves to seek new ones aligned with evolving capability. The transition becomes less about rejection and more about alignment with future trajectory. Identity expands through movement. Now the deeper realization appears. Changing environment does not guarantee higher income immediately. Instead, it alters exposure, expectation, and opportunity density, conditions under which income growth becomes increasingly probable. Environment change shifts probability structure. Professionals who successfully navigate this transition often discover that growth accelerates once new surroundings normalize higher standards. What once required effort begins feeling natural because environmental reinforcement replaces internal resistance. Belonging reforms at a higher level. And once individuals understand why leaving familiar environments feels difficult, they begin interpreting discomfort differently, not as warning, but as evidence that identity is adjusting to new possibilities capable of supporting expanded income and long-term wealth creation. Now the perspective shifts toward the final realization. Income growth is rarely accidental. It is environmental design, whether conscious or unconscious. Throughout this conversation, a pattern has emerged. Income is not shaped solely by effort, intelligence, or discipline. It evolves from expectations, conversations, proximity, opportunity density, social proof, and the energetic rhythm of the environments we inhabit. These forces operate continuously, shaping decisions long before financial outcomes become visible. Most professionals attempt to change income by changing behavior alone. They work harder, acquire additional skills, or optimize productivity while remaining inside the same environmental structure. Effort increases, but surrounding expectations remain unchanged. Over time, growth slows because behavior adapts to environment faster than environment adapts to behavior. Environment sets the range within which effort operates. This realization introduces a different approach. Instead of asking only how to improve performance, individuals begin asking whether their environment reinforces the future they want to build. The question becomes less personal and more structural. What conditions surround daily thinking? Designing environment does not necessarily require dramatic relocation or immediate career disruption. Environmental influence accumulates through exposure. The people you listen to regularly, the conversations you participate in, the professional communities you observe, and the ideas entering your attention each day gradually reshape perception. Small environmental shifts compound. Introducing new intellectual environments through networks, communities, or collaborative spaces alters financial imagination. Exposure to different standards recalibrates expectation. Opportunities become visible because attention changes first. Awareness precedes outcome. Wealth builders often design environments intentionally around three invisible variables: expectation, proximity, and opportunity flow. They seek spaces where growth feels normal, where ambitious behavior receives reinforcement, and where possibility appears frequently enough to encourage action. Environment becomes strategy. This design process is rarely dramatic. It unfolds gradually through choices about where attention goes, whom time is spent with, and which professional conversations become routine. Over months and years, identity evolves in response to new inputs. Income follows identity evolution. Now something important becomes visible. The goal is not constant dissatisfaction with current circumstances. Stability has value. Relationships matter. But remaining unaware of environmental influence allows income to be determined passively by surroundings rather than intentionally by alignment. Unconscious environments produce predictable outcomes. When individuals begin curating environments deliberately, financial life changes quietly. Ambition feels less forced. Decision-making becomes clearer. Growth opportunities appear more frequently because awareness expands toward them. The environment begins working with you instead of around you. Fear of change decreases because expansion feels socially supported. Identity adjusts naturally. Higher income no longer appears extraordinary. It appears consistent with surroundings. Wealth becomes environmentally sustainable. This perspective removes much of the pressure associated with individual success narratives. Financial growth stops feeling like constant self-improvement and starts resembling ecological alignment, placing oneself where growth conditions already exist. Success becomes contextual rather than heroic. If this conversation resonated with you, consider subscribing to Mindful Wealth. This channel exists for thoughtful professionals who want deeper clarity about money, success, and modern professional life. Conversations designed not to motivate, but to help you see the invisible forces shaping your decisions. And if someone came to mind while listening, share this episode with them. Sometimes the most important financial shift is not learning a new strategy, but recognizing how environment quietly defines what feels possible. Until the next conversation, continue building intentionally, not only by improving effort, but by choosing environments that naturally elevate the level at which your effort begins to matter.